is that these American airstrikes on Caracas have, in fact, signaled the dawn of yet another chapter in America's history of geopolitical aggression, keeping its own interests in mind. To speak to us about these developments and more, we're now joined by Narendra Taneja, energy expert, and Jayant Krishna, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Krishna, if I could first start with you. What do you reckon? Do you think this is a one-off show of force by the United States, or are we looking really at the primary and opening phase of a sustained military campaign against Venezuela?
So I think, let's first understand, what kind of country Venezuela is. It is in the northern coast of South America. It has a huge continental landmass. Plus, they have a large number of islands all across in the Caribbean, right? And it is world's leading oil exporter, right? Despite that, if you look at the country, it ranks very, very negatively on the corruption indexes, on the freedom of press index, on civil liberties, on crime, on unemployment, poverty, inflation, starvation, you name it, and they are ranked very, very badly, right? So I think with the current regime, what President Trump was upset about Venezuela was that, they were at the forefront of narco-terrorism. They've had shown a lot of conspiracy to import cocaine. There was a huge amount of drug trafficking that was happening. And that's a reason, when they deployed Navy in the Caribbean, the US deployed Navy, they also destroyed the drug boats and especially the docking station and so on and so forth, right? So I think whatever you may say, I mean, there's bound to be an argument that, why US took such a step, it is against a sovereign nation and so on and so forth. But the fact is, how do you tackle in a day and age when the UN has become such a weak entity? How do you tackle such an authoritative regime? It's largely, it's a very, very autocrat kind of a regime, led by a virtual dictator. Huge amount of electoral frauds have been done in that country. Human rights abuses are rampant all across. The economic hardship the people are facing. Can you beat it? World's one of the largest, topmost oil exporters. Most of the oil exporting nations are so rich, right? But why is it that Venezuela is so poor? The per capita income is low, the poverty is everywhere, unemployment is everywhere, right? So I think, and as a result of which almost 8 million people have fled, Venezuela. I think with these kind of things, while in principle I am against any country, attacking, another country, but looking at what was happening in Venezuela and looking at the international agencies being so poor, I think somebody has to call the shots and tell them that look here, enough is enough.
Absolutely. In fact, we'll come to the reasons in just a bit, Mr. Krishna. Thanks firstly for breaking that down so eloquently and setting the context right there and then in terms of the attack itself. But in fact, let me quickly come over to you, Mr. Taneja. Now, the factors owing to the US aggression aside, let me ask you, what impact does this have really on the geopolitical energy balance, given the fact that Venezuelan oil reserves are arguably some of the largest in the world? What does the attack do in terms of affecting the global energy balance, this strike, after the strike, of course? How is this all set to be changed?
Well, when you look at Venezuela's, oil wealth, I mean, Venezuela holds the largest reserves of oil in the world, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than any other country. Roughly in the region of 300 billion barrels of oil. That's the kind of size of reserves. But when you look at their oil production and their role in global energy landscape, it's very small because they are, due to internal reasons and some of the reasons which have been just pointed out, Venezuela is a very small exporter of oil. They're not among the top 5 or 6. They're not. They have potential, but they're not. For various reasons, as we know by now. The question is that why have they failed to exploit or to realize their full potential? Domestic reasons, internal politics, and bad economy, bad policies, and so on and so forth. So that's the reason. So therefore, whatever happens there in terms of American intervention, or there is some kind of uprising, internally, or there is a new regime, we don't know that. It's too early to say. But one thing is clear, is going to have no impact on oil prices. The main reason for that is, yes, they hold larger reserves of oil. But right now, when you look at Venezuelan oil's role in the global supply system, is not very significant. So no big change, no worry. Price is not going to go up or down. But one thing is clear that, if there is really a regime change, there is a new regime which prioritize oil exploration and production and the welfare of the ordinary people down there, then of course American companies are going to rush and invest more in oil and assets in Venezuela, which means that in time to come, America's dependence, which is the largest importer of oil, by the way, also the largest producer of oil in the world, but it depends on the Middle East, particularly the Gulf countries, going to come down, and over Venezuela is going to rise. Would that be a good development from the US point of view? Absolutely, yes. But would that be a good development for the overall global supply system? Probably yes.
It's interesting that you're mentioning that, Mr. Taneja. So I have to ask you, these actions, military nature, of course, on Venezuela itself by the US, is there scope in any way at all to, weaken the strategic leverage now of OPEC, Russia, and even China in the global energy markets? Do you see a correlation or any sort of impact post military action itself?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I mean, if the US, which is the largest consumer of oil in the world, and also the largest producer, as I said, if the US dependence on the Middle East, or for the matter, other, oil exporting country comes down, and they're able to meet their oil requirement, let's say from Venezuela and the neighboring country, very close to Venezuela. So if that happens, then of course, the global geopolitical landscape will change dramatically. And OPEC will be very worried about it, which means their importance in terms of what happens to oil prices globally on day-to-day basis or hourly basis is going to come down. And therefore, when you look at OPEC, Russia, or that whether, for instance, China, Russia, and when you look at the other, I think it's going to have a very different impact on the oil prices. Would that eventually lead to America, Venezuela, and Guyana, which is sitting next to it, and also huge reserves of oil, all part of the same kind of, I won't say the same kind of umbrella, or at least similar thinking? Would that be positive developments? We are certainly going to see America together with Venezuela and Guyana rising as a very big pole, very powerful pole in terms of the energy geopolitics and also global energy geoeconomics. In ordinary people's language, what happens to oil price?
Absolutely. So a lot of conditionals there, given the fact that a lot of this depends, on, of course, on whether that campaign continues to be a prolonged military one. But coming back to you, Mr. Krishna, I know, and I heard you say, set the context a little early in the discussion when you said that the socio-economic conditions in Venezuela were such that an intervention was perhaps justified. But the question really is, and as much as I know you don't support external military intervention, under what law, international, of course, can the US possibly justify the action on Venezuela in the first place? Self-defense, counter-narcotics is, of course, something that the country has spoken of, ad nauseum in the past. Is there something else, perhaps, that the US might want to use to justify these military strikes, Mr. Krishna?
So I personally don't think there's any international law which will support this kind of intervention, kind of a thing. Even the narco-terrorism, one thing is, defending US vis-a-vis anything that Venezuela does is a different thing, but attacking directly and taking, the president in custody, I think that's a different thing. One can always debate the merits and demerits and whether it's a righteous step or not. But the fact is, it has been done, and and always in something like this, there'll be countries which will be supportive. Many countries will not be supportive. Within US itself also, there'll be a lot of voice against this kind of attack or whatever it is, right? But that's a different thing. But I think a lot of negatives have been happening in Venezuela for a very, very long time. Even if you look at India, while India is not a very large importer of crude oil from Venezuela, but companies like Indian Oil, Reliance, HPCL and all, they have been importing, right? So not as much, of course, as we import from Russia or some other countries. But I think The other expert, who's an energy sector expert, he is very clearly defined, as to what kind of impact it will have on oil. But some people are also saying that, this is also some kind of a quasi proxy war against China. So I think it remains to be seen which way things will settle, and whether it's only an attack to capture President Maduro and his wife, and whether they want to go for a complete regime change or just the change of precedent, or which way, and how prolonged or how short-lived this intervention is, time will tell. But I don't think US should long last, this invasion, this, if at all you call it an invasion. I don't think it's an invasion, but whatever it is, that intervention should not be allowed to last too long. The strategic objectives having met of a regime change, and perhaps it will also pave way for entry of American oil firms into Venezuela, and more investments in refining and so on and so forth, so that US, which is already holds commanding heights in oil exports all over the world.
Right.
With the Venezuela oil flowing into their kitty, or their companies, I think it will help that country, reinforce its position of eminence in oil.
Absolutely. Right, absolutely. Well, the fact remains that even as these discussions over energy balance are underway, the fact is that a whole lot needs to be analyzed and observed and looked at with regard to whether or not the military conflict, or the strikes rather, turn into one that is prolonged in nature, even after which the conditional and hypothetical aspect of whether or not this translates into an energy rebalancing or not is yet to be seen. But on that note, Mr. Krishna and Mr. Taneja, great speaking to you gentlemen as always, and thank you so very much for breaking down that for us on the show today.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we're slipping into a really short break, but we'll be back with more news and updates on the other side. Keep watching ETNL.